square footage space I have in the new shop is less than my old working environment, but in my old environment, it was in multiple small spaces, many of which were outside. And so this has the advantage of all my tools in one space, a flat level floor, and some degree of climate control. So I really feel like I can get a lot more done in this shop, but I have to be a lot more conscious of what I'm trying to do because I don't have the square footage that I once did. So everything's on wheels. Everything can be reconfigured. The shop can be restructured for workflows. One of the things I'm trying to get a big project finished after the one that's on the board right now is a big fiberglassing project. So the golf cart, which had been the flame cart, is now turning into a storm cart. It'll have a large cloud on top, some LED-driven lightning bolts, and then misters built into it.
Your golf cart is definitely one of the more memorable things I've seen you in. I'll never forget going to Flipside and seeing that big giant. It was painted up all red.
Mm-hmm.
And you had the steel structure welded all the way around it, and then you had one flame jet that I just found out tonight was actually repurposed from being a
hot air balloon
burner, and now you have two.
Yep. I needed symmetry.
How long were you able to get that jet to shoot off of that golf cart?
Typically, you can shoot a jet that's, say, 10 to 15 feet, depending upon ambient temperature and things like that.
Now, that's not. Would you do that kind of a jet length if in an actual hot air balloon, or that's at the balloon on fire?
Most of them are designed to do that big a flame. I mean, you want to heat up as much air as possible. So there's the hot air balloon burners typically will work in two modes. Mm-hmm. There's a loud mode and a quiet mode. And the loud mode is designed to make a bigger flame, like when you're inflating the balloon in the first place. And so they'll blow air to try and give enough space, and then they'll blow that monster flame in there and just keep it wide open as long as they can to heat up the balloon enough to start lifting the basket. You don't want that when you're flying over a field of cows in the dark, so they have glow mode that will be a quieter burn, but it produces a lot more light, and it lights up the balloon, but it doesn't scare the stuff underneath you.
Oh, and I've seen that, like balloons floating at night, and they're just like glowing orbs going through the air. Yeah,
it doesn't roar when it does that the way it will when they're running it wide open, mm-hmm. which is essentially an issue with oxygenation, how much air it's pumping in and things like that.
So is it pushing in more oxygen? That's what's creating the brighter flame?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly the mix they use to get the difference between the two modes. Mm-hmm. I've never had the urge to leave the ground in a wicker basket hung by ropes from some silk. Mm-hmm. That has not been an issue for me. The equipment's lovely, and I'd like to acquire as much of it as I can, but the actual purpose to which it was intended is something I only know bits about. I met at Maker Faire a couple of guys from the local hot air balloon society who sort of kept waving at me. I didn't know who these guys were, and they kept waving at me in the crowd, and I was just like, oh, come on over, sure, you can come look at this stuff. And they're like, oh, that's a 1979, blah, 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 part number 17. I haven't seen one of those in a while. And they gave me tons of information about stuff. And they still tease me with this idea that somewhere, even in Austin, there is a warehouse full of this type of equipment that has been decommissioned. Because once it's been through a wreck or anything like that, you have to go through a very lengthy process to get the FAA to recertify it. And a lot of people just won't. So I bought those off hot air ballooners off eBay because they'd been decommissioned. They were a couple $100 instead of a couple $1,000. Perfectly good for just burning propane for the sake of oohs and ahs.
Could you say it fell in your lap?
It fell in my lap with my lap jumping around to catch it.
Hopefully it didn't fall for the person that was using it last.
Well, and that's the other place you get them is estate sales.
Oh,
There's two
and
sources.
there's some dents on them sometimes.
Sometimes.
That's you brought up Maker's Faire, which is actually where I first met you, Tim.
Hmm.
And I happen to have my book with you that I bought online before I knew who you were. And you even signed it for me. It says, "To
Oh,
Floki, let's light up."
yeah,
Light it
right
up.
on.
Thought that was cool. I took this to Burning Man, and that's why the pages are kind of damaged because one of our gallons of water spilled open in the back and soaked it.
I love to see grease on the pages. I
It
love to see wrinkles. I love to see dog ears.
Well, I can tell how far I've read because I haven't peeled all the pages out yet. So,
Ah, yeah.
so I'm out into chapter 3 now. But this book is fantastic. It's called "Make Fire: The Art and Science of Working with Propane," which Tim is known for having a whole fleet now of giant boosh cannons, as they
Yeah,
call them.
I've
And
been very lucky.
what's it? BooshBeats is your new company you're starting up.
BooshBeats is the name of the effect, so it tends to be the sort of marketing term I use for. It's one of those names that you realize you're about to have to write the name of your band, effect, play, whatever, and you've never spent any time thinking of a name.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden you've got to come up with something because you're about to write it down for somebody else. And BooshBeats was as good as I could pull together. I'm sure there's a better marketing term out there for what it is and that, but it's good enough. And
I mean, no, it's great because you got beats, which is, sound and music, and then boosh is the sound, literally, that these propane cannons make
Yeah.
when they go off. So
it's kind of the onomatopoeia
explanation-
instrument.
yeah, the explanation's in the name. Even I know that like the band Rush came up with their name because they were in a rush to come up with a name for a band.
Right. Yeah. I had a band that I played in one time, and we got our first gig by surprise, and they were like, "What's your name?" We're all looking at each other, or on the phone, we're all looking at each other like, "Oh my God, we got to get a name." And we all
We
looked
didn't
at,
think that far.
and we didn't. And the kitchen table had a can of bug spray on it. We're like, "We're off." And later, it was a Frip Loop band playing just weird electronica type poetry over Frip Loop. Later, the band evolved into a alt folk band, and so we changed the name to Deep Woods Off.
Deep Woods Off.
Kept the theme alive.
Oh, wow. Is that a band still, is there music available to be able to listen to?
There's certainly ungodly numbers and hours of tapes that no one's listened to in a very long time. There are a few good tapes. That band morphed into a children's band that was a ukulele sousaphone kids band that played birthday parties in schools and things like that. And I still work with the guy who I was playing with in the 80s who was in it with me. So we still talk about it from time to time. We haven't played out in a very, very long time.
Oh, that's now. I guess all that I didn't know you were in a band, and that makes a lot more sense now with BooshBeats and how like you seem to have programmed a lot of like timing signatures, if you will, into the.
I'm a synth collector. I'm a synth freak. I have that collector bug. So upstairs there's boxes and boxes and boxes of synthesizers that haven't been unpacked yet. So I do a lot of MIDI microcontroller development because I'll want some toy that doesn't exist that I think up in the MIDI world. And so BooshBeats was originally conceived as a MIDI drum machine using the propane and strike plates as the percussive instruments. And so I really wanted to just have a MIDI-driven drum machine. And even the first version accepted MIDI. I couldn't find anybody who wanted to send me MIDI. I worked with Pony Trap, but they don't use MIDI as their control mechanism. So I've used it with my own synthesizers and drum machines and things like that. But I look forward to the day that I'm able to take a plug from somebody else or send them my time code and let them play along with me.
Now, I get videos of your boosh cannons going off on my YouTube channel. I think you have a couple other clips, but how would you describe what this cannon looks like? When it's going off and even like the stand itself.
So imagine a human height row of 8 flame effects. And by flame effect in this case, I mean a cylinder on a stand. So the cylinder is right about chest height for most people. It's got a nozzle. The cylinder holds propane vapor and is continuously fed from a fuel cylinder, and that's at high pressure propane. There's a solenoid valve, which lets me use 12 volts of electricity to open and close the valve and release the big collection of propane vapor that I've stored past a pilot light, which creates either a jet or a fireball, depending how fast it's going. For BooshBeats, what it does is a set of different configurations where that jet of flame, which is typically about 15, 20 feet long by about 8 to 10 feet wide at its widest, it strikes various things. Like it strikes a 3-foot in diameter galvanized steel plate. And what that does is cause the fire jet to shoot out radially and make a big, wide, flat pancake of fire. So if you're behind it, you see this big, giant sort of flat fireball. If you're in front of it, you see this really interesting, almost like eclipse of the sun experience, where you've got this metal plate that all of a sudden has this ring of
Like a
fire
corona.
jetting out on all sides, 3 or 4 feet. And so you're getting the sound of the gas hitting the plate. You're getting the sound of the gas leaving the jet, which by itself is that boosh sound that the onomatopoeia represents.
Boosh.
And then you get the strike, and then you get the flame, roiling in the atmosphere. So it's a multi-sensory experience. I mean, you can smell it, you can almost taste it, you can feel it, you can hear it. It definitely is a full sensoria kind of.
A fire show for all the senses.
Yeah, and there are 8 of these, and they're lined up across about a 30-foot stretch. So, and they're going off, and they do patterns. So the outside 2 will fire, then the inside 2 will fire, and then they'll all fire, and then they'll ripple across and ripple back, and they can be programmed in different patterns to achieve different effects according to what the musician playing it wants to do.
Nice, and I see that you have a built-in soundboard into your control panel here.
Well, and I love to be self-sufficient. As much as I like collaborating with others, it's always frustrating when something falls apart and you end up someplace and you can't do everything you want to do. So I tend to, develop for self-sufficiency. So in the rack-mounted controller I've built for BooshBeats now, I went ahead and did what racks are really intended to do and stuffed a PA amplifier and a mixer in there as well. So I can generate I can bring my own music. I can play somebody else's music. I can turn mine off and let the house PA play. I can use any existing source. But if all else fails, I can still bring a generator, bring my rack, my cabinets, and I've got a full experience, for sound. And then lately, the BooshBeats controller, which has a main control for the effects, and then there's a secondary shelf where I have a 8-step sequencer for the effects, so I can fire patterns in the background, sort of as the ambient, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, while I manually sort of play grace notes to fill in with little booshes here and there. There's also a chord chaos pad that's up there, so that if I'm playing music, I can also, while I'm playing BooshBeats, also do some DJ-like bends and mixes and effects on the music. So it doesn't have to be just canned music. It can actually be both musical performance and flame act performance at the same time.
Wow, that's awesome. And you had to forge and make a lot of these parts yourself.
I love fabrication. That's one of my absolute delights in life. So a lot of the parts in the panel are 3D printed. A lot of the parts in the panel are cut on CNC. There's tons of welding in the project. At the moment, there's no fiberglassing, but that's soon to be remedied because that's resin work is something I'm very into right now. I'll be adding CNC plasma cutting soon, and that'll mean that I can start building more elaborate stands and brackets. Right now, they're pretty utilitarian, but I can start adding filigrees and grace notes to the designs of those because it'll be relatively low effort to do so with the CNC cutting the metal for me instead of me having to fabricate curlicues and whatnots in the look and feel of it. So I expect a sort of a better presentation to evolve for the effect as I add fabrication skills and capabilities in the shop.
Wow. And so I mean, looking through your book, I see tons of different propane and boosh cannons, different styles, and even like campfires and portable apparatus. What was the first propane device that you built? that started all this?
The first propane device I built was a very basic boosh, like the most basic boosh. My whole journey into like how did I start doing this really is reflected in why I wrote the book, because I didn't have a relationship with anybody who knew how to do this. Mm-hmm. And it was very frustrating. I mean, I've spent years, finding my own way in, microcontroller design or teaching myself to weld or things like that. But it seemed like there was some potential pitfalls in building fire cannons that might not be pleasant to live through. And, realistically, everybody who did it seemed to know how to do it, and everybody who didn't do it didn't. And there was no path from one to the other if you didn't have an in with the people who were doing it.
Mm-hmm. Or the people who forged and took the risks and figured it out.
Yeah, and I thought that was really misguided. I just felt like that whole, and as I explored it, it turned out to be the equivalent of an apprenticeship model, which has some advantages, but has some big disadvantages, because not everybody has access to that, and it's still, they go off and try and build these. So I started doing a lot of research and found a few sort of hints about how to do it. Started talking to people who were plumbers and HVAC people, started talking, reading everything I could find about oil well flares, which are essentially the same thing, just on an industrial scale. I started looking around and realized as I stared at other people's things, yeah, I could build one of those. So I built a very basic boosh that had a simple accumulator, a simple valve, a simple pilot. I've still got it. It was outside. My reference boosh is really the just sort of tarted up version of the very first boosh I built. It's on the very first stand I built. And up here are the vents for it as well. So it's got the original pipe, my original pilot that I made out of copper tubing. But that experience left me with the idea that this whole model is broken. Lots of people want to do this. Very few people can figure out how. A whole bunch of people are trying without knowing what they're doing. And as I started working at Maker Faire and meeting people who were building things out of plastic, washing machine valves and pieces of PVC tubing with propane running through it, my heart just went cold. It was like, these people are going to blow themselves up, or me.
I think I need to leave right now.
So I decided to, pitch a book to make. I had been selling articles to make for a while, and just actually ended up in exactly the right place at exactly the right time for Roger Stewart, who's the greatest editor of maker books on the planet.
Oh.
If you've ever read a maker book that you thought was really awesome,
I'm reading my first right now, and I think it's pretty awesome.
Odds are it was Roger Stewart, and who edited it, and he took this on and fought against all comers. And the reality was, there was an intervention staged by a number of National Flame artists to try and get me to stop writing the book.
Okay, I can see that. As in, were they trying to protect some secrets or the art?
No, the reality of it was they were trying to keep people safe.
Okay.
And so I have a number of friends in the Flaming Lotus Girls, who are one of the greatest fire acts of all time ever. I could only aspire to sweep their floors. And they found out I was writing the book, and they mentioned it to some other people. And eventually what happened is I got a call from Dave X, who's the head of Fire at Burning Man. Mm-hmm. He's like, I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Dave X. I'm like, oh, yes, well, Dave, I do know who you are, yes. Dave X, head of all flame safety at Burning Man. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, I understand you're writing a book. Yeah, I really am. That's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. Oh, wow, you got some concerns. He goes, yeah, you need to stop writing that book. And I realized that I was at a real crux of a moment. Mm-hmm. And Dave X is legit. If every fancy fire thing you've ever seen as a picture of Burning Man, or if you've been to Burning Man and seen, has passed through his hands, gotten his approval, gotten his inspection. Mm-hmm. He's been there from the beginning. He knows everybody. And it wouldn't necessarily have stopped everything if he'd gone bad, but I realized I had the opportunity to bring him on board. if I handled it right.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, hey, I understand your concern. I understand this apprentice model is the safest way to do it. I just have to tell you that there are a lot of people doing it who don't have access to that. There's people in Oklahoma City, there's people in Boise, there's people all over the country, in Austin, Texas, who are just going out and building unsafe stuff. And truly, I believe that good information will chase out bad. And we talked back and forth, and he expressed a lot of my concern, and we weren't getting very far, though we were making a little progress in terms of talking. And finally I said, hey, how about this? I'll send you the proofs. You review it. If it doesn't work for you, we'll go around and around until it does. And if it can't, I won't publish it. And I have my heart in my throat because I just gave away my publishing agreement to somebody else.
Wow.
And, he's like, well, okay. To his credit, he absolutely reviewed the proofs in detail. He found one section where he'd like to have a chart detailing the difference between Schedule 40 and Schedule 80 pipe, and was okay with the rest of it. And I said,
don't.
so my deal was, I said, all right, if you don't like it, we won't do it. Mm-hmm. If you do like it, I want you to write the foreword. And he agreed. In the end, his note that he wrote was very in character, but very cautionary. If you look, it's now the afterword, because it's really fire burns, fire kills, fire maims. Don't be a jerk to your friends. Don't kill your friends. Don't ruin it for everybody. I mean, those are literal quotes. And my publisher was not real thrilled with that being the first thing people read. So it's our afterword, which is perfect because I also got permission from Burning Man to use the Burning Man flame effect guidelines in the book.
Spoilers, you're giving away the ending.
Just so you know, it's legit. It's been through the ringer with the big names. And Dave X has very graciously repped the book at some of the California Maker Fairs for me. Mm-hmm. So, that was a real hurdle to pass. And I got very lucky. I got the editor who would fight with the publishers and the lawyers. Mm-hmm. I got the editor who got me the actual copy editor who made sure that my text was understandable from a general audience. I got Make magazine at a point in time where they were looking to extend out. Oddly, that's the only Make book in that series that doesn't have the standard cover because Roger really wanted a big fireball on black as the cover.
Yeah.
So I got extraordinarily lucky, and oddly, for a Maker book, it paid out its advance and has been paying me monthly royalties. Not very much, but any Maker book that pays any royalties is a real winner.
And now you're building giant boosh cannons.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I mean, that's great that you're sharing your knowledge and art with the world, and that's also helping support you to make more and push the art even further.
The best part of the book has been that on the website for the book, there's a contact submission form where you can contact me directly. And I get something on the order of maybe 8 or 10 of those a year, sometimes more around Burning Man or various events. But almost all of those people who are asking questions, I now have relationships with. I mean, if you write to me and say, hey, I like the book, I'm trying to get this thing done, first thing I want to know is, oh my goodness, what you doing? Show me pictures. Come on, let's talk. And I've spent hours and hours on the phone with some of these folks. And, between the email contacts and the word of mouth contacts, I've helped, be in the birth of a couple hundred flame effects around the country, which is just so, heartwarming.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So it's a very, very, just an amazingly lucky opportunity for me that I've been so thrilled with.
That's awesome. Your first chapter goes into really incredible detail about propane, and I realized I didn't know much about it at all before I started reading that. But one thing that struck me immediately was you mentioned that, which I didn't know, it's a non-toxic gas.
If the threat to humans, other than it being on fire and burning you, if it wasn't so cold, because it has to be kept cold or under pressure to be liquid. If it were at room pressures and as cold as it needs to be, it's a mechanical threat to you. You'd get frostbite, but you could drink it. You wouldn't. It's not toxic at all. It's not toxic to breathe. You might run out of oxygen because it displaces all the oxygen in a room, but it wouldn't poison you in any way, shape, or form.
So this is toxic. It's like outer space. No oxygen environment, but beside that. And it mentioned that it's involved in paintball guns.
Yeah, they call it green gas, and what they do is they put some silicone oil in it so that it serves both as a lubricant and a pressure. The beauty of propane is that it doesn't matter if there's half an ounce or 5,000 gallons. It's all at the same pressure. It maintains the vapor that boils off of that liquid rises to the pressure appropriate for the ambient temperature. It doesn't matter how much it is. If you've got a full cylinder, it's why when you look at a propane cylinder and it's got a little gauge that shows you how full it is, that's the most bogus piece of instrumentation on the planet. It's going to have the same pressure whether you just filled the cylinder or you're down to the last 3 drops. As long as there's liquid in there and it's the same temperature, it's the same pressure.
Now, back when I played paintball, I think they used CO2 in the tanks. And,
Yeah.
and there's been a switch to propane, but how are they not having people, going like Ripley from Aliens and putting a lighter on there in the propane gun?
It has happened.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, don't do that, kids.
No, it's not a great idea. But CO2, as the volume goes down, the pressure goes down. Propane doesn't.
Oh.
So that's why I went into that's why I was
That would be way better for
emphasizing.
tournament. Yeah.
They emphasizing it doesn't lose pressure as it loses liquid volume.
Those paintballs always did hurt extra hard when we first filled up the tanks.
Yeah. So that's the win you get off propane is that it's a consistent pressure source.
Oh, that's really cool. And then I guess so CO2 and propane, they both had the same effect, which I actually wrote down a quote from your book that I didn't realize, which is you can release pressure faster than you can draw out heat. So you end up with the temperature the temperature becoming unstable inside the tank, which then creates that frost effect on the outside of the cylinder.
Sure. So when you draw vapor out of the cylinder, so you get think of a barbecue cylinder of propane. It's got liquid, and then there's some empty space, but it's not empty space. It's full of propane vapor. When you open the valve and some of the gas, the vapor, blows out, the liquid that's in there boils to replenish the vapor. Because the only thing that's keeping it liquid, at this temperature is having enough pressure in the cylinder. So it boils and fills it up so that it stays liquid. If it didn't, it would just all boil away.
And when it boils, it's not even like a hot boil. It's a cold boil almost.
Well, all things are relative. Because its boiling point is, a couple 100 degrees below zero. So it boils at a much, much lower point than water, for instance. So it is a cold boil, but that's the human. That's an anthropogenic model.
But to say like if you were to stick your hand in a glass of boiling propane, what would it feel relative to you?
If that propane, it'd be difficult to do.
Okay, all right.
I'm trying to visualize what it would feel like because the first thing that would happen is if you tried to have a cylinder of a cup full of propane liquid, it would be nearly explosively boiling because it would vaporize so quickly at this temperature that it would just all flash boil. If it were cold enough that liquid would stay liquid, you'd get frostbite while it boiled. And this is a problem they have like in Minnesota where they have people trying to either heat their homes or say heat a foundry or do pottery casting with propane stuff is that, it might be 30 below zero and a propane cylinder is now so cold that it'll only generate 1 or 2 psi instead of 300 some psi.
Because the evaporation rate is so slow.
Well, yeah, and so what happens is like inside that cylinder when you draw the vapor off and this propane boils, it's drawing energy to boil. I mean, it's a phase transition, so it needs energy, and it's getting that from the outside air, the ambient temperature around the cylinder itself. So the liquid inside is cooling, and the cylinder itself, the metal cylinder, is cooling. And so that condenses water out of the air, because it's like you've seen it in like your refrigerator or your AC coils. They get frost on them. And that's what it's called, is auto refrigeration. And the cylinder, like even here in Texas, 104 degrees, you take 100-pound big cylinder of propane, you start running boosh, 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 your big old grin on your face as you pump 30-foot fireballs in the atmosphere. And then all of a sudden your 60 psi that you were getting is 50 psi, and then it's 30 psi, and then it's 10 psi, and then it's 5 psi, and your boosters are like poof, poof, and you've got an inch of ice surrounding your cylinder now, because you've boiled off so much of it that it's drawn all this energy out.
And it almost has like a cold shield around it that's now keeping it from being able to extract all that ambient heat out of the air around it.
There's two things that people who do flame effects professionally spend all their time on. One is ignition, pilot. I mean, that's the biggest and hardest thing to do consistently, is have it light when you want, every time you want, because there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's really difficult. The second is managing the auto refrigeration issues so they can get consistent pressure, which is why a lot of people go to liquid, because liquid, it's all about where you vaporize the propane from liquid into gas. In vapor effects, you're doing it in the propane cylinder, so that's where it cools off. In a hot air balloon, you don't want to have no pressure. So what those coils at the top of it is where the liquid is turning into vapor. And the fire is run through those, so it enhances that effect. So the vaporization is occurring right at the point where you want to create the vapor. And the heat from that burn is actually keeping those coils from frosting over and freezing. So you can draw every bit of liquid out of the cylinder without cooling the cylinder or losing pressure in it a bit. So like the Flaming Lotus girls, liquid effects are very common. There's all kinds of things you can do with them that you can't do with regular effects. They rent industrial vaporizers and generate huge quantities of propane vapor to handle all the effects they put in place. But dealing with the auto refrigeration and dealing with the ignition is really what constitutes the difference between like advanced or pro level flame effects and I build a boosh and I make fireballs, which is perfectly fun and great to do. I'm not dissing it. I'm just, it's interesting where people evolve in their focus in it.
Wow. And now, I guess you probably know, you mentioned air conditioners and refrigeration. Now, isn't someone told me once there was a special quality to Freon that allows that possible?
Well, the first refrigerators were built using ammonia. And you can build a refrigerator out of any gas that you can compress and expand to generate heat and pull. When you expand a gas, it draws heat from areas that'll cool things, and so that's refrigeration. So you could build a refrigerator pretty much out of a boosh if you wanted to. I mean, realistically, if we took the hot air balloon burners and ran propane through them and just let it jet out and didn't light it, those coils get icy cold right away. All we'd have to do is run some water around them or blow air across them. We'd have an air conditioner. We'd also be blowing propane into the air, but, it would be refrigeration.
Oh.
So in the back of the book, so the front of the book, the first chapter, as you mentioned, is really the science of propane. And that was the first thing I wrote. I wrote that years before I wrote the book because I used that when I was teaching classes in flame effects and how to build them. And at first I thought that's all the book was going to be. And then they were like, Make wants projects. So they're like, yeah, build a project. Actually, build 8 projects. Like, oh, okay. But I wasn't willing to do it without a foundation. And so the first chapter tries to give you enough so that no matter what you want to do in propane, what you see being done by somebody else, or what the later projects do, you understand what's going on. You can, just by virtue of first principles, understand what's safe and not safe, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Because if you only know how to do something safe by rote and you don't understand why it's not safe, you're really as at much danger as you would be if you were just doing things randomly almost, because things will creep out of nowhere and you won't understand why they did that. But with a very limited number of ideas around propane that anybody can understand under your belt, you can go look at any flame effect, understand how it works, and understand, where it would be safe and where it would be dangerous. The back of the book goes into more science detail, and it goes into an explanation of the gas laws, of Boyle's law, Avogadro, these different scientists who formulated the understanding between temperature, pressure, volume that really constitute what's going on in the system. Mm-hmm. So for an even deeper dive, the appendices are your friend.
Wow. And, one thing that you talked about, I'd like you to elaborate on, was how propane was discovered. And it had to do with people back in, I think you said 1913, filling up their gas tanks and then getting home, and their gas tank would be half empty.
Yeah, they'd be really, really cheesed off. And it was a big issue. It went to the government, and the complaints mounted, and the guy who got the complaints filled a big gallon jar at the gas station, stuffed a cork in the top, and took it home to study it. And along the way, the cork blew out. And
multiple times.
Yeah, and he was just like, something's going on here, and became very interested. And, pretty much all the propane that we get is a byproduct of the creation of other petroleum products. So the fractionation of gasoline into diesel and gas and jet fuel and all its various components releases propane as a byproduct. And so it's really not something that we make industrially for its own sake. Certainly everybody recognizes the value and captures it, and resells it, but it's not independently produced from the rest of the petrochemical industry.
Mm-hmm. And we happen to live in Texas, which is also where one of the largest storing locations, where they have a bunch of salt caverns out in, Mont Belvieu, Texas?
Yeah, there's like 3 around the country, and they're just monster caverns. They wouldn't be the kind of cavern you can really go walk around in. They're just big porous rock formations, but they are sealed. Some of them are salt caverns, some of them are limestone caverns, but they're sealed enough that you can pump high pressure volumes of gasoline, they're the same kinds of places that are used for National Reserve gasoline, but you can pump propane into them and store it at pressure over time.
Oh, wow. And that's just because it got so much layers of salt.
Yeah,
they're just making
there's
nice.
An inert as far as the propane is concerned, the salt is inert, and so the propane does interact with it. Propane, which is not an inert gas by itself, but for a lot of materials acts as though it were. You can store it in there, and there'll be no chemical changes to the salt or to the propane itself, so you can draw it off as a valved resource.
And I guess that's works as a cushion also in case it were to ignite.
Well, and this is one of the things that it's not commonly understood, which is one of the things I emphasize in the first chapter, is that propane, if we took a bunch of propane vapor and we filled a 55-gallon drum up with it, and it's heavier than air, so it'll settle in there, and we were able to just keep it real still and fill that propane drum up, we could take a lit match and toss it into there, and it would just go out. Propane by itself, 100% propane, simply will not burn. It would extinguish fires. And so if you were jetting propane out of that cavern, anything in that path would be extinguished. There'd be no oxygen. Propane is only flammable when it's mixed with oxygen at 2 to 9% propane, and the rest is, you have to have a certain percentage of oxygen, but in air, it's 2 to 9% propane, the rest of air, for it to be flammable. Shy of that, it's outside what they call the lower and upper limits of flammability. And so if you don't have enough propane, it won't ignite. If you have too much propane, it won't ignite. And so a lot of things that, scare people about, what if there's propane there? You're only really at risk, and there is risk, but you're really only at risk where the propane's mixing with air. If it's not mixing with air, it can't burn. So the cylinder, in a boosh cannon, that accumulator, which is full of high pressure propane, or if you vented it out, low pressure propane, there's no risk of flame shooting back down the tube and exploding the accumulator, because there's no oxygen in there. You've pushed it all out. You've displaced it with propane. And so, like on a oxyacetylene torch, you would have to put a flashback arrestor on the acetylene line so that the flame front can't travel back up the hose and explode the gas cylinder. With propane, you don't need that, because even if there was no pressure, as long as it's got pure propane vapor, there's no oxygen. It can't burn. There's no risk.
Wow. Man, I'm excited to see the next thing you're going to be building with all this knowledge, Tim.
It's funny. The book, you mentioned there were a lot of different kinds of projects in the book, and the reality of why, besides the fact that Make likes to have lots of projects in their books, is each project takes an idea that I wanted people to, a skill in building these things, and lets you have something you can use as a result of that one skill. And each one adds a skill. So when you get to the final chapters and build the boosh, it's not like you're having to do everything without having gotten any awareness of the steps along the way. In between, you build a flambeau, which is nothing but a piece of pipe with a bunch of little holes in it that you light the gas coming out. But it's a lot. Anybody who's ever been to Mardi Gras knows there's the guys who march in the parades with the big torches.
Yeah.
They're called flambeaus. So, building flaming signs. We, built signs at Burning Man events that, have lots of little flame holes. Those are flambeaus. That teaches you a whole bunch of interesting skills in flame effects work. Then we have projects that build a fire pit, a propane-driven fire pit. So, if you go out and look at what fire pits cost, they're hundreds of dollars. But you can build one yourself very easily for a lot less money and learn some interesting brazing skills and other things to be able to put that together. There's also a foundry torch that you can use for doing a raku kiln or doing metal casting or blacksmithing. There's a variety of different projects, all of which add skills so that when you get to the boosh, you've got all the sub skills already developed and some interesting things that you could, have built and played with. And I've been amazed at how many people bought the book and weren't interested in building flame cannons.
Oh.
They were actually interested in the other projects in the book, which never occurred to me as anything but stepping stones.
You don't want to make giant fireballs in the sky?
Yeah. But, along the way, one of the things I've found is that I love building fire pits.
Yeah.
They're awesome. They're really fun to have.
That's actually the first one that I'm going to take on in that book. I saw that and I was like, oh man, that would keep us warm in our camp at Burning Man this year.
Yeah,
so.
it's portable. It's clean burning.
Mm-hmm. It looks accessible. I wouldn't even have to carry the tank. I could just pick one up on the way.
Yep.
That sounds awesome. So back to your fire beats. Where is a good place for people to find out about watch some videos of you or like even book your act, because you're putting together a full stage show?
Yeah, right now BooshBeats.com. That's BooshBeats.com is the website for the effect. Most of the information that's there now is from its last Maker Faire event. So there's videos. There's some diagrams. Because I came at this through the book, I don't have a proprietary sense over it. If somebody else decided they wanted to go out and build something like this, if they're obsessive enough to do it, I want to come watch. So, things like my autopilot design for using hot surface igniters instead of gas pilots are all detailed in there. The electronic schematics for the first generation controller are all in there. The code that I wrote for the Arduino to generate that is all there. So it's a place to go look at the effect, watch it, get some ideas about it. I'll be posting some of the next generation pictures up on it. But it's also a place, if you're building things, to see how the innards were put together. Because at this point, I'm as interested in sharing this as I am in, just getting attention.
Mm-hmm.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm very interested in getting attention.
I mean, yeah, no, I was enjoying the tour you gave me of you just moved into a new home, and you showed me your workshop, which is still coming together, but all your boosh cannons in the back, and they're disassembled right now, but I know you're going to be tinkering pretty soon getting those back together.
It was an exciting move. I have friends who are in the Austin Fire Department who I got rid of a lot of stuff when I moved out of my old place. And at one point I was giving away a sailboat to a friend, and I had forgotten that that friend was a high-ranking officer in the Austin Fire Department. And my driveway at that time had almost 50 propane cylinders and flame effects and stuff stacked ready to be trucked out of there. And he's walking around taking pictures, and it's just like, oh my God. And I'm like, so Danny, no need to mention this anywhere, huh? And he's like, oh, that's not my jurisdiction. It's okay. I'm saying, well, you're taking a lot of pictures there, Denny. He goes, yep. Just want everybody at the station to remember, you never know what you're going to find at a house fire.
Oh man, that's great that you have such a good relationship with the fire department here.
I have never met a firefighter who doesn't have a love of fire.
Mm-hmm.
They are committed so deep in their hearts to the safety of people and structures, and once that safety is assured, they love fire. I was on a volunteer fire department for a number of years, and a lot of the things I really love about fire I learned in that environment. Because we set fires for various reasons, for training, for backfires, for things like that. We were given trailers and houses when they were being destroyed to burn down like 10 times. Set it on fire, put it out, set it on fire, put it out, practice.
Mm-hmm.
And, about that 11th or 12th time, people start getting creative, artistic in the fires. And so, there's a certain joy to the experience of fire that I think everybody, gets a little bit of when you're sitting in front of a fireplace or staring at a candle, or if you get to see a flame effect show, it's got a rush to it. But when you go a little bit farther and start starting those fires or those fireballs or those booshes, it adds a whole nother layer of fun.
That is spoken from a real pyro to say that there is an art in even the extinguish
Yeah,
of flames.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. You said you learned a lot of lessons. What's one of the first lessons that comes to mind when you did that volunteering for that fire department?
There are very different definitions of trust among humans. This was an important lesson. I'm not sure everybody gets to learn this one, but I was very lucky to get to. I was on a volunteer fire department in Pensacola, Florida, that I lied about my age and joined when I was 16.
Oh, cool.
Because I was going bald in high school and I could fake it. And I had been in other things like Red Cross Disaster Action Team, and I wanted to step my game up. And so I lied about my age, and I got in this fire department. And within a month, I was going into trailer fires and warehouse fires. It was a very urban environment. And, flaming roofs had come down on me. And I never, ever felt afraid, because every time I got pinned under a burning beam
Every time?
It happened more than once, yeah. There were hands pulling me out. There were people who didn't hesitate to come in and get me. And, I knew that if I was behind somebody on a hose, that was my job. My job was to make sure that that person was safe. And, guys who I had very little else in common with, I formed a trust bond that was astonishing. So I go out into the larger world. I go to college, and, I go to places where there are parties and people are talking about, we'll all be brothers together and all this stuff. And I realized that their definition of trust, had more to do with, I probably won't puke on your bed when I'm drunk.
Bros.
Yeah, bro culture, and it inoculated me. The understanding of what trust can really mean inoculated me, and it let me search out friends and relationships in life that had that quality of deep safety and that deep trust, because I was lucky enough to experience it instead of a shallower trust. So it's not directly related to fire, but it does have a lot to do with sort of, maker culture and doing dangerous things for art. The people I collaborate with are people I trust. Mm-hmm. They're not people who just get crazy with fire.
Yeah, they're not people you want to, they're people you want to play Catan with.
Yeah. The other really great lesson I learned on the volunteer fire department is that if you're really committed, anything will burn. We would after our regular weekly meeting have a regular game of Will It Burn, and people would bring things to the fire station and see if we could set them on fire. And you knew it was going to be a good night when they're starting to roll out the oxyacetylene tanks and the heavy duty welders and things like that, because those guys, when they got it under their skin, I mean, the first time I saw concrete set on fire, I was entranced.
Wow.
I was like, oh, things in life aren't necessarily what they seem.
Now I'm just imagining what concrete would look like on fire.
It's not visually that impressive, but the experience of that stuff going up, I mean, getting it that hot in the first place and then...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But to burn something, it has to turn to gas. No solid ever burns. Everything that you look at that's burning, whether it's wood or a wax candle or anything that you see burning, the solid fuel material has vaporized into a gaseous material. Mm-hmm. So it undergoes a transition. So solids don't actually burn. Solids vaporize and the gas burns.
And now, at what point is it considered a plasma?
So plasma has, it's another state of matter and it has an electrical dimension to it as well.
Oh, okay.
So plasma is an ionization activity that occurs with, it's all electron chemistry. Mm-hmm. Really we're getting down to what happens when you really mess around with electrons. And fascinatingly enough, if you ever want to go on YouTube and watch, and I would advise watching one of the modern versions of it, but Faraday, who's one of the great scientists of 2 centuries ago.
Michael Faraday?
Yeah. Did a lecture series for essentially teens. It was really the equivalent at that time of high school chemistry. But he did a lecture series on candles because he really felt, and the lectures demonstrate beautifully, that pretty much all the principles of physics that you can explore are present in a candle flame. And when you get into what's going on and you explore it and you do a set of very straightforward experiments that he was able to do during the lecture that they'll do on YouTube as they give the lecture and that people at home can do themselves, demonstrate some fascinating principles around oxygen, vacuums, electrons, fuel, oxygen reduction reactions. There's so much that goes on in a simple candle flame that it really does. I mean, one flame can represent almost all of what underlies the universe. It's a fascinating introduction to how you can take something that's beautiful, reduce it to science up until it becomes beautiful again through the understanding that you derive.
Wow. One candle flame can represent all the understanding of the universe.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's both philosophical and scientific at the same time.
That's beautiful. I love that. Well, I think I'd like to end on that, Tim. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I know if I'm being humbled, then I think we definitely captured a lot of good information on it.
Well, I love to talk, so
yeah,
share
great.
fire fun.
I'd love to have you on again sometime. So
cool.
That's awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tim.
Fire now. You got my attention. Is something burning?
If you want to support the All Things Fire podcast, head on over to patreon.com and search for Morgan Floki. Thank you for all your support, travelers. Have a great day.